Hello and welcome. This is Microsoft Flight Simulator and this is the Phoenix Airbus A320. And today, once again, I would like to talk about a topic that was requested by one of you. And that person asked, can you please make a video about Autoland? So yeah, we certainly can. Autoland, however, is an incredibly complex topic. It really depends into how much detail we want to go here. You may have heard about Cat 3 single, Cat 3 dual, all the requirements, all the limitations, all the equipment necessary at an airport, etc, etc. So I started creating a script where I actually went into all these things, but it turned out to be a mega video. And I thought to myself, you know what, about 70-75% of the things I'm talking about here are actually completely irrelevant in the sim. So what I've decided to do is cut it all down and sort of create some custom procedures just for the sim. And this will mean you follow the exact same procedures that we do in the real world, but certain things will just overlook, because the airports in Flight Simulator will always have all the lights working. You will never have an airport where the, I don't know, runway edge lights are not working, because then again it becomes more complicated. Can I land? Can I not land? Etc, etc. So we're not going to go into all of these limitations because they never happen in the sim. Luckily in the sim everything is always fine. And can I just say, I loaded here into London Heathrow thinking, okay, I'm gonna make some really bad weather because, you know, it's England. But I always load in with real world weather, and if you look, this is live weather, so I don't actually have to do anything. This is exactly what it looks like in London right now, and as you can see, we do have to perform an Autoland here, so this is perfect. I didn't even have to change the weather. Okay, so before we even take off, let's talk a little bit about the theory behind Autoland. You will have all done an ILS approach, and essentially that's exactly what it is. It's an ILS approach, but at the end you do not switch off the autopilot. The aircraft will just land by itself. So what's the big difference? Well, the difference is you can't just do that because you're tired. You think, oh, I'm going to do an Autoland today. That's not how that works. The airport needs to know if and when an aircraft performs an Autoland and needs to set itself up for it. And you can't just request that on the approach. It needs to be done way in advance. So if for training purposes someone wants to perform an Autoland on a day when it's sunny, the airport will have to know way in advance, and you will find that quite often they will actually deny your request because it's a huge thing for them to change over. Again, I'm not going to go into every single detail, but for you in the sim there are a few things you absolutely need to know. Let's look at the most important one straight away. Okay, so in order for the ILS to guide you all the way down to the runway, it is absolutely vital that the ILS signal does not get disturbed in any shape or form. And the ILS signal can get disturbed if another aircraft or vehicle gets too close to the antennas. And this is why we have two kinds of holding points at airports. So, I mean, this is an Asobo airport, so it's not very accurate, apologies for that. So this is what we call the Cat 1 holding point, or pattern 1. I don't know why they put two on top of one another here, but essentially this is what I'm talking about. So on a nice sunny day, this is your holding point. However, the minute you see low vis operation in force on the meter, this becomes your holding point. Again, I don't know why they put two on top of each other here. This is what it should look like, and this is why you need to stop, and you're not allowed to go into this area here. And this is to protect the ILS, and that's one of the reasons why you can't just say, oh, today I'll do an Autoland, because if it's a nice day all the aircraft will be holding here, and there's no guarantee that the Autoland will actually work. Okay, so before we get started and before we take off, one last thing. If you already know that you are going to perform an Autoland at your destination, few things you need to check beforehand. So first of all, is the airport actually certified for an Autoland? The easiest way to see this is you look at the ILS chart and you look at the minimum. If there is a minimum that only says Cat 1 and nothing else, that means the airport is not certified for an Autoland. And if the visibility is really bad, then you have to go somewhere else. You can't land there. Of course, if you see a minimum for Cat 2, Cat 3, that means you can perform an Autoland. Next thing is the aircraft. Is the aircraft certified for an Autoland? Well, the A320 is, of course, but does it have any defects? Is there anything in the technical logbook that could affect the performance when performing an Autoland? Also, during the flight, what happens if you have a defect that develops during the flight? Usually when you press status, the Airbus will tell you here whether you can still perform an Autoland or not, depending on the system failure. So these are all things you need to check. Of course, in the real world, we also need to ensure that our license to perform Autolands is still valid. This needs to be renewed on a regular basis through a sim check. Of course, that is something you don't have to do in the sim. In the sim, you are the boss and you are absolutely certified and you are going to do a great job. Okay, let's get airborne and then I'll talk you through how to do all of this like in the real world. Okay, we've made our way up to 5,000 feet. As you can see, we are already above the fog, so it's very low, shallow fog. And we want to get ready now for the approach and our Autoland. So we've ensured that the aircraft can do it. There's nothing on the status page. We can do it, we are certified, and the airport can do it as well. So everything is fine. So let's talk about how this approach usually goes down. So you fly the ILS as you usually would. Obviously you don't touch anything, you use managed speed, so make sure you set up the performance page. So on the performance page you need to put in your weather and then the minimum. Now the minimum depends on what kind of approach you are going to fly. You can see this on the charts, but obviously it makes sense to use the lowest possible minimum because then you have covered all bases. And at my company and for the Airbus, that is actually no decision height. So you just put in no here in Baro, and then the Airbus knows that we actually gonna have no decision height today. So even if at, I don't know, 50 feet you still can't see the runway, it doesn't matter. You can still carry on and the aircraft will land all by itself. Then you fly the ILS as usual. Obviously you're not gonna see anything, but you know, the aircraft doesn't know that there's fog outside. It just does what it always does. So what happens? There's a few things I want you to know. This is more technical background, but I think it's quite important. So once you pass 700 feet radio altimeter, so the altitude that's shown to you down here, the FMS is frozen, so you're no longer able to put anything into the MCDU. Once you pass 400 feet, the FCU is frozen, so you're no longer to put anything in here. When you pass 350 feet, the word land must be visible here. If it isn't, you need to perform a go-around. The next thing that happens is at 40 feet. At 40 feet, the word flare will show up here. Again, if at 40 feet you do not see flare, you immediately perform a go-around. This is a very low-level go-around. We've discussed go-arounds already in a separate video. Just be careful, don't pull excessively. You are very likely to slam into the runway on that go-around, and maybe wait with the flap retraction a few seconds just to be safe. At 30 feet, the Airbus will slowly start reducing the thrust to idle, and at 10 feet it will say retard, retard, at which point you move the thrust levers to idle. Now that's different to a landing where you actually fly and where you have a minimum, so a Cat 1 ILS. At that point you would be flying manually, and when you fly manually, the retard call is a reminder, not a command. So what that means is you decide when you cut the throttle. If you come in quite high and maybe you need to correct and the speed is going up, and at 50 feet you're above the speed, you might actually want to cut the throttle at, I don't know, 30 feet. I've done it, and it's still a nice landing. If on the other hand the wind changes, the speed drops, the aircraft says retard, I sometimes leave the thrust lever on a little bit longer and then put them into idle so we don't slam into the runway. When you perform an Autoland, none of this matters. You simply move the thrust lever when the aircraft tells you, and that's it. You don't look at the speed, nothing else. It is a command, not a reminder. Okay, and then there's one last thing I would like to talk to you about, and this is this light here, Autoland. So this becomes armed once we pass 200 feet above ground level. And the point of this light is to help you to decide whether you can continue an approach or whether you cannot. So let's say you are below 200 feet and you get an ECAM warning. Something has gone wrong. Now we have a long list of features and items that need to work in order to perform an Autoland, but that close to the ground you're not going to have the time to actually go through that list. So the rule is simple. If you get an ECAM warning and this light stays off, you can continue the approach. If the light comes on, you need to perform a go around, because whatever has just gone wrong has degraded the aircraft's capability to perform a go around. That's a bit simplified, to be honest, but in the sim that's exactly how I would do it. Light, go around, no light, no go around. Very simple and actually very clever. And that brings us to the landing and rollout. So on the Airbus we always do an automatic rollout. I know it's a bit different on the 737, but here you leave the autopilot on. After the landing it's the same procedure as always. You're going to idle reverse or reverse, whatever you've calculated. The callouts are spoilers, reverse green, decel. You just make sure that the aircraft is actually decelerating, which you should see here. And depending on the software, sometimes the aircraft will actually show you which brake setting is set, and you check that as well. You let the aircraft do its thing. It's gonna stay on the center line and slow down, and once you hit 70 knots ideally, or a speed where you feel comfortable to taxi off the runway, don't forget to switch off the autopilot, otherwise you're not gonna get off the runway. And that's it, then we're on the ground. So those are all the things you need to consider, and now I would say let's fly back to Heathrow and let's do it. And look at that, this part of England is much nicer. Well, let's go back to London. Okay, we are approaching the ILS. I've just set manage speed. Before you do that, make sure the approach phase is active, otherwise the aircraft will stay at 250 or maybe accelerate if you're below that speed. And now we can arm the approach. So you press approach and switch on both autopilots, very important. And you do the call out, glide slope blue, lock blue, cat 3 dual, autopilot 1 and 2, because that's what you need for an Autoland. Okay, speed checked, flaps 1, and we're gonna work our way down to flaps 2. We have lock star, very nice. Speed checked, flaps 2, and now we let the aircraft do its thing. Okay, we are established on the ILS, we are in landing configuration. Let's quickly do the landing checklist. ECAM memo, landing no blue, cabin ready. Landing checklist is complete. We can also perform a VLS check. 130, 130, looks good. Okay, we're approaching 700 feet, at which point the FMS is frozen. There it is. Next is 400 feet, at which point the FCU will be frozen. So that's coming up now. There we are, 400 feet. FCU is frozen. Land light is on, so we're good to go. 300 feet. At 200 feet this warning light gets armed.
200.
It is armed.
$100. 50, 40, 30.
Flare mode.
20. Set. Retard.
Retard
Done.
call. And we are down. Spoilers, reverse green, decel. The autopilot is still on, I'm not doing anything, let the aircraft do the rollout. You can see the word rollout. 70 knots, reverse idle. And here we are. Autopilot off. And now we need to get off the runway. Few things. In conditions like this, Airbus says you shouldn't do anything whilst taxiing. It's very easy to get lost. Both pilots should be fully focused on making sure they know where they are and where they're supposed to be going. So at my company, after engine start, we do a lot of the checks and flows already. Then we both fully concentrate on how to get to the runway. We stop in front of the runway where we do all the remainder of the checks and then we take off. So here, what I would recommend in the sim, make absolutely sure you are behind the Cat 2 holding line for the reasons I've explained before. If there are none, like here, oh no, there is one, absolutely, perfect. So make sure you get behind that so the next aircraft can land without any problems. Then you stop the aircraft and perform the after landing checks and the after landing flow. And then you look outside again and concentrate on where it is you need to be going. So now we've stopped, down, weather radar off, flaps up, we switch off the TCAS and we'll start the APU. There we are. Those can come off. And now we make our way to the gate, and at the gate, yeah, we do everything as normal. And I'm going to leave it there. As you can see, when it comes to Autoland, there's actually quite a lot of stuff going on. I tried to find a good compromise between the real procedures and what is actually relevant in the sim. I hope you found this interesting and I hope it's gonna be useful. Thank you again for the request for this video. It was actually a very interesting topic that, to be honest, didn't even cross my mind. So anyway, thank you very much for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, all the best. Bye bye.